Jornadas Interuniversitarias de Investigación en Didáctica de la Lengua y la Literatura. First of all, I would like to thank the conference organizing committee for inviting me to hold this guest lecture. Thank you very much. My name is Alicia Chabert and I teach English and translation at Universitat Jaume I. My main line of research includes English as a lingua franca within multilingualism, and today I am going to focus on multilingualism in the 21st century through the lens of a global language. In this conference, I am going to approach the current situation of multilingualism in education while trying to answer the following questions. So, do English language learners consider themselves plurilingual? What is the role of other languages in the learner's linguistic repertoire? What does multilingualism in the 21st century represent for education, especially in primary school? So for this, we will focus first on English and its global use. English has rapidly become the language for international communication, conquering science, promoting English publications, and prioritizing native speakers. In turn, this results in very good publications in other languages, ranking very low in comparison, or lacking the same prestige. In business, it has become essential to such an extent that some companies have it as their official language, such as Nokia or Microsoft, Google, and also in terms of applying for jobs, prioritizing English speakers over experts in a certain field that speak other languages. It has become the language of technology and the internet, introducing new terminology such as influencers, blogging, tracking, VR, and being the most used language on the internet with a 25.9% in 2020, followed by Chinese with a 19.4% and Spanish at 7.9%, with the rest of languages constituting a much lower percentage. So we can already see a big difference between English and Chinese, and if we compare it between English and Spanish, it's almost a 20% over. All this has shaped education, with English becoming compulsory, starting at earlier ages, and universities choosing English as a medium. English language has been transformed into a skill or a competence more than language itself. At the same time, the addition of English to our lives has ensured that multilingualism and plurilingualism have become more present than ever. With this in mind, we will define multilingualism and plurilingualism as they are interconnected and yet provide us with a different picture. We will refer to multilingualism in the sense of the context where multiple languages coexist and are used. Sometimes, languages will be limited to a specific purpose, or a group of people, or a situation. In fact, traditional multilingualism acknowledges languages as separate entities. On the other hand, plurilingualism focuses on the individual. It involves being aware of the interconnectedness of multiple languages. So, multilingualism and plurilingualism, depending on the context, can be used interchangeably. They involve a different perspective. Multilingualism is more like multiple languages in one context, and plurilingualism, multiple languages interconnected but within one individual. Having said that, let's look at the realities of multilingualism and plurilingualism. An individual becomes a plurilingual from the moment they become linguistically aware of a new language. There are levels of plurilingualism, and the concept of considering oneself a plurilingual becomes a very subjective one. Languages do not exist as single entities, hence it is rather impossible to be fully monolingual, which renders the question of why second language acquisition has been striving for monolingualism for so long. Monolingualism is indeed a myth, and now more than ever, languages overlap and interconnect thanks to technology and the closeness of a world that is getting smaller. So, assuming everyone is a plurilingual, their status can be divided in the following. And before we describe them, we will note the fact that we are saying LX to refer to any additional language other than any considered mother tongues. So we're not gonna call it L2 or L3 because it could be any language aside from the mother tongue. Maybe the person has like 2 or 3 mother tongues as well. So we're just going to talk about LX in general. So also just to clarify, when we said status, in which we divide them, we refer to the status of plurilingual, like the different states of the plurilingual. So LX learner would be when the individual exclusively uses the LX language in an academic setting. So the language is learned for specific purposes and there is no prospect of practicing the language outside the classroom. For example, a teenager learning English as a course requirement. Then we have the LX user, in which the individual uses this language within specific contexts, independently of the regularity of the use, without receiving any formal training of the language. This LX user has different levels depending on the language knowledge and use. For example, we could refer to a Chinese immigrant in the UK who speaks Chinese with her family and English with her friends, or Spanish speaker that reads a Catalan paper or newspaper because he can understand it despite considering himself monolingual and not using or producing Catalan on a regular basis. Then finally we have the LX learner user, which would be a combination of the two. So the individual actively learns the additional language and uses the language in a real setting. For example, we could have a flight attendant receiving Italian classes or German classes and practicing in a professional context. So having established all these, does monolingualism really not exist? So starting with the unclear definition of native language that has been referred to as the language from birth, the language that one knows best, language from the country you're from, we can see that it's very difficult to limit the word native. For instance, you can know one language best, but it happens to be one that you learned after you were 6 years old. You may be from one country that speaks 3 different languages and your family speaks yet a different one. You might be using a language in your family context, which happened to be the first one that you learned, but you use a different one in a different setting that makes you feel more comfortable using, and it might be the one that you most commonly think in. So despite all these very common situations, linguistic theories assume monolingualism as the norm, despite being, as we can see, a very clear exception. So on top of that, we need to also bear in mind that many actually refer to themselves as monolinguals, even when they're not, rather than bilinguals or plurilinguals. And even most English as a lingua franca users would describe themselves as monolinguals of their own language. This proves, on the one hand, the subjectivism of the term, and also the evolving status of the plurilingual, as use and knowledge fluctuates through someone's life. So let's look at multilingualism and English. So if we focus on English in particular and its global state at the moment, we can see that it is near impossible to remain monolingual. While ideological monolingual ideas might remain, the fact is that societies are multilingual, not only in the case of co-official or minority languages, but also with the presence of English that can be found in most areas of life. We can see that more than in any other areas, for example, in marketing, which is something that we subconsciously consume on a day-to-day basis, whereas it's in social networks, on TV, or on the internet. All this has resulted in a shift in learning languages, and now they are seen from the point of view of possibility, so like becoming a plurilingual, rather than impossibility, that is, trying to achieve that golden native status that it was considered like the highest of the proficiency levels. So this brought us to the multilingual turn. The multilingual turn is a major shift in SLA that has been happening since the last decade of the 20th century, and it's a major shift towards multilingualism. And most recently, this then has been led by the Douglas Fair Group. This shift reconceptualizes the notion of linguistic competence, analyzing the experience of the speakers in different levels, accounting for their interactions, their experience in communities, and also their ideologies. This shift aims to bring attention to the learners' diverse multilingual repertoires, as well as expanding the perspectives of SLA researchers and educators with regard to language ideologies and multilingual learning. And it is within this multilingual turn that our research is located. So let's look first at common misconceptions in English teaching. It is commonly believed, even nowadays, that the best way of learning is a full immersion where the learner forgets, to an extent, their own language. From the moment that they enter in the classroom, they only speak English, and they forget about any other language that exists outside of this realm. So to achieve this, all English is recommended by the teacher, and native forms are the goal, with the native speaker being the ideal. And it's usually either British or American styles of natives. While this idea has been prevalent for decades, it completely disregards plurilingualism and multilingualism, and also the latest research that shows the benefits of actually using plurilingualism in learning. Because of it, this results in misunderstanding the position of English within multilingualism, which leads to treating English as a threat to other languages. At the same time, plurilingualism in language learning is completely underestimated, despite the fact that many students have shown the benefits of learning using their own mother tongues as scaffolds. Likewise, when treating language separate, they are presented as competition rather than linguistic pieces in the multilingual fabric of our society. So let's look at the background of our study. We carried out a very big study focused on English learning from a plurilingual approach. For such research, we studied the students' perspective of English learning versus its use. We carried out an experimental study in which we compared the results of students learning from a plurilingual approach compared to a traditional monolingual one. We compared the results through an exam and class notes, and also followed by questionnaires. At the same time, we analyze the language policies per country to understand the context in which the students learn, as well as the factors that affect education and shape the teaching approaches and styles used in the classroom. For instance, Spain is a big advocate for plurilingualism, yet understands it from a language isolation perspective, which means that the English classroom still will only use English. It's just that some subjects are in Catalan, other are in Spanish, other are in English. Now, what we will see in this lecture is just a snippet of this whole research, and in this one in particular, we will focus on multilingualism in the classroom in the 21st century. In terms of the participants, we had 3 very different contexts, as I mentioned. One was Castellón, which is a bilingual area of Spain, of Catalan and Spanish. We had Levanger, which is a northern area of Norway, and 2 areas in China, Xiantang and Shenzhen. Xiantang is a rural area of Hunan, and Shenzhen is an urban area close to the Hong Kong border. So it was, despite being China, very 2 different experiences. In total, we had 314 students participating in the study. We focused on year 6, which is the year before going to middle school, when the students are 10 to 11 years old. At first, we can see that the number of students per class usually lies between 20 and 25, except for rural China, which contained approximately 50 students per class. Actually, I don't know if you'll be able to see in this slide because the camera will put me somewhere that might cover it. Just so you are aware, we have most of the classes in most of the students are between 40 and 50 in total per school, except rural China, which is 99, and in total we do have 314. This fact, the fact that China had in the rural area such a different number of students, like double the students, had a direct repercussion on the students' ability to practice in class and receive the necessary attention, as well as performing the study. So for our research, we carried out an experimental study in which a series of English classes were taught using a plurilingual approach on one group and a monolingual one on the other. At the same time, the classes were recorded and class notes were taken to document the students' responses and attitudes. Finally, we conducted a questionnaire focusing on the learners' awareness of language itself and language learning, as well as their perspectives as English learners. So if we focus on the young learner's perspective in the class, this was one of the sections that was very interesting in our research, because we were trying to understand what the learners thought about plurilingualism and the English speakers. Given that the 3 contexts come from a very different background and teaching tradition, the results were quite telling of very different perspectives. So polls were carried out in class for this specific test, in which 2 questions were asked. So the first one being, who are English speakers? For which most students, approximately 90%, and this 90% is more Norway and Spain. It's more like 100% in China. Referred to British and American, with some students including other countries from the inner circle, such as Canada or Australia. There was a very similar result in the 3 countries, as I mentioned, but also Norway, as well as these English speakers being from the inner circle, they also mentioned maybe like between 5 and 10%. Countries such as Jamaica or Kenya, basically countries that were old colonies from the outer circle. No students believe that English teachers, or English teachers that are not native, or students would ever classify as English speakers, despite being able to speak English. At the very least, the teachers are able to do this. And 100% of the students in every single country, 100%, confirmed that English speakers require being native. Hence, they would never be able to achieve that level, nor did they consider other nationalities that speak English as English speakers. That is, when they speak English as a second language in a country, they would not consider it at all as English speakers. The second question in this recorded poll, was who is a plurilingual, which would be further analyzed in the questionnaire later on. But to these questions, Norwegian participants replied things such as someone who uses different languages equally, or a native of different languages, which shows an understanding of plurilingualism as separate languages, lacking any sort of interconnectedness. Chinese participants in both rural and urban regions alike were unfamiliar with the concept and were unable to reply, like they did not understand it at all. In Spain, where the study was carried out in a bilingual region, the students mainly focused on people who speak Catalan and Spanish, both languages, on a regular basis, and who used, or maybe someone who uses different languages with the parents, maybe Catalan with the mom, Spanish with the dad. But definitely in that plurilingualism, no sort of English was classified. So no one at all from Norway, China, or Spain classified English as part of this plurilingual repertoire. While this was expected based on the fact that they're younger learners, this already sets a precedent that English is treated differently ideologically, and also that students do not understand plurilingualism per se, and maybe not even the teachers do. So here, where we see results, we are focusing on a section of our questionnaire, in particular to 3 questions. And it was 3 questions that were dedicated specifically to talk about plurilingualism. So one was, what language or languages do you consider your mother tongue? Do you consider yourself plurilingual? And then the second one would be, what languages do your parents speak? Are they plurilingual? So we can observe on the table the languages, and here we can see the number of students and the language they consider the main spoken language. In terms of the term plurilingual in this section, the first 2 questions do refer to whether the students are considered plurilingual by themselves. Whether plurilingual in the 3rd question refers to the indistinctive use of more than one language in the household. In terms of the word other, we use these to refer to any languages classified as no official in the country. And in China in particular, it refers to dialects. So here on the left of the slide, we can see what each of the words refer to on the table, and on the right hand side on the table where it says participant 1 refers to question 1, parent L1 question 2, and the last one question 3. If we look at the Spanish schools first, we can see that there is a clear majority of Spanish use, 69 out of 132 students, over the minority language, Catalan. However, it is also very notable that there is a considerably high percentage, 34%, of students that consider themselves plurilingual compared to other countries. While the plurilingual cases are mostly Spanish-Catalan, these also included combinations such as Spanish and Chinese, Spanish-Catalan and Romanian, Spanish-Italian, among others. Schools 1 and 3 in Spain have commonalities in the diversity of languages spoken by the participants, given that the schools have a higher percentage of immigrant students of first and second generation. So school 1 and 3 included L1s languages such as Tamil, Italian, Arabic, Romanian, Russian, and Chinese, whereas School 2 included French, Romanian, and German, had a high proportion of Catalan in comparison to other schools, and the plurilingual results are mainly combinations of Spanish and Catalan. In Norway, however, there was a very clear dominance of Norwegian over any other languages. Yet this was to be expected given that the immigration rates in this region are very low. 89.7% of the students considered Norwegian as their main language and speak it at home, with only 7.7% considering any other language as a mother tongue, and only 2 participants considering themselves plurilingual, despite the fact that most of them are actually plurilingual of other Nordic languages as well, and a few of them even had several mother tongues. The participants, like foreign languages in Norway as mother tongues, included Turkish, Uzbek, Estonian, Hungarian, and Luganda. Lastly, the findings in China were very different to the other two countries and provide an interesting picture of China's linguistic context. While all participants added Chinese as their language, they used different characters that imply certain cultural connotations. So only 2 options were received in these questionnaires for China. One was Zhongwen, excuse my pronunciation. This is what is commonly known as Standard Chinese Language, so we classified it as CN. That would be like Simplified Chinese, Mandarin. And then we also had Hanyu, while it is also referred, for Chinese, like Chinese Simplified. This terminology alludes to the language used by Han people. There are 56 different Chinese ethnicities, and this one refers to the main one. So these terms include any other dialect spoken by someone of Han ethnicity that also speaks Chinese Simplified. So we classified those as other on the table to differentiate it. So while technically all participants answered that they only speak Chinese, linguistically speaking, they are different concepts with different connotations. It is worth noting that while a great number of minority languages exist in China, they are not overly exposed, and generally the students belonging to a minority attend different schools. So in our school, we don't have like a big sample of this. Now, if we move to the conclusions, we would say that in conclusion, throughout our study, at least this very small part of our study that we are presenting here, we observed a clear misunderstanding of what multilingualism and nativism represents in language teaching, as well as the understanding that there's a lack of awareness of the purpose of language learning by the students. For English teaching to fit in the current multilingual reality, it needs to take into account multilingualism in the 21st century, which means taking into account the languages in contact, not just in physical context, but also technological contact, contact as well at home. And as well as that, the role of English within this multilingualism, because English is one piece more, as well as the rest of languages. If English is understood as a communication element, like one more element, like any others, we will be able to eliminate the perspective of English as linguistic imperialism. By focusing on multilingualism in language learning, there will be a change in perspective that can help transform English as an additional language rather than a threat to minority languages. So that is, if it's part of our linguistic repertoire, we will understand it as, this extra competence that we have, that is not trying to replace any other languages. So with that said, I would like to conclude this presentation, this lecture, and I would like to thank you all for your time and attention, and once more thank you to the committee for inviting me. Have a great day.